Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hi, it's Zoe. So, what would you do if you had everything you believed in, everything you loved, everything about who you think you are ripped away from you? How do you begin again? How do you continue life? How do you reinvent yourself? Well, that's what my guest today is going to share with us. How do we actually develop resilience, whether it's for your personal self or for your organization? She says the principles that you apply are exactly the same. She has an incredible story to tell, and it is an absolute delight. And her name is Jennifer Eggers. She is the author of Resilience, It's Not About Bouncing Back, which is an international bestseller in several categories with many 5-star ratings. She is known for helping leaders demonstrate visible leadership fast. She is a former partner with Cambridge Leadership Group, Vice President, Leadership Development and Learning for Bank of America, and has had several other roles in learning and organizational leadership development. She is an advanced practitioner in adaptive leadership. So you know her and I are going to get along when we talk about complex systems and adapting organizations and people within complex systems. So we dive heavily into some of the fundamentals and explore some of her background. So yeah, you're going to love this. I had a ball. Let's get into it. All the way from Pennsylvania, welcome Jennifer Eggers to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
We were just comparing weather notes, as you do when you talk across the planet, and how it's cold and miserable and dark, wintry, end of winter over there. And today is just a beautiful autumn day. Well, here in Australia, we don't say fall, it's autumn, which sounds very regal. In any case, weather aside, let's get into the exciting stuff that I know that you have been working on. Your book is out. It's called Resilience. It's Not About Bouncing Back, which it's a great place to start. So if resilience is not about bouncing back, and that's typically what people think, resilience, you get a hard knock and jump back up again. What is resilience about?
Yeah, so we believe that resilience is not about bouncing back, because by the time you try to go back, there's often no back to bounce to because everything around you has changed. And so when we go through this disruption, resilience is really about coming out of disruption energized and elevated and ready to go forward. I even have to catch myself too, but ready to go forward, more effective than you were having gone into the disruption. So we're thinking about resilience as the ability to use the disruption to actually get energized and elevated by it.
That sounds lovely. It sounds impossible in some regards. If I think about people experiencing disruption through COVID in 2020, and how difficult it is to find light in the darkness when everything has been turned upside down. What's the starting point? Where do people start in terms of trying to gather their skirts around them and look forward to the future?
That's the $64,000 question, I think. But COVID is a perfect example of how we can't go back, right? For a while, we all talked about, well, we're going to get back to normal and when we go back. But I think we're starting to realize there's no back. We're not going back. We're going to have to figure out what's next and where are we going to, and how are we going to live with this pandemic in our midst? Because I don't think it's really going away. I mean, we certainly hope that, things will get better, but I think it's more about, where do we go from here? And so, like any major disruption, I think, the first step is kind of figuring out who are we in this, right? What are the beliefs that ground us? And then how do we sort of make meaning in the situation? So I think, it's interesting. There's 3 characteristics of resilient people and organizations. And I think to me, the most fascinating thing is they're the exact same characteristics for people and organizations. So for me, that's incredibly compelling. There's a million people, and I'm certainly one of them, that can, write a book about resilience that spawns out of sort of personal hardship. But that's nowhere near as meaningful to me as transitioning this into thinking really about how do we build resilient organizations. So the cool thing is there are 3 characteristics, and the 3 characteristics are Number one is having a firm grasp on reality. So I think it really is not in longing for back, but actually in owning where we are and what's happening to us, right? So the firm grasp on reality has a lot to do with what's the situation that I am in, what's changed for me, and how long maybe will it be till we can do something, and what are we going to do in the meantime? So it's really this firm grasp, not clouded by optimism or rose-colored glasses, but really thinking about what's going on right now practically that I need to face and deal with. The second characteristic is the ability to improvise. And so, we've all done a lot of improvising, I think, since COVID. And so that's going to help us going forward. I mean, if we can't get our needs met in this crazy environment, and just think about relationships and, how do we keep these informal relationships and conversations maybe we had, in the office over the water cooler or out to dinner or whatever, but how are we going to get that need met some other way? So it's the ability to improvise. And then the third one is the ability to find meaning in the situation. Those are three things that we know when leaders and organizations have those abilities, they tend to be more resilient. So maybe it's first recognizing what is resilience. And I say that because there's a difference between, I think what we've been doing a lot of in the last year is coping. So there's a huge difference between coping, which is sort of like just getting by, this sort of survival thing, and building real intentional resilience that's going to get us through this thing in the long haul. And I think we've been coping for far too long, is that's my sense, is that when you're in survival mode for that long, it just takes a toll. I mean, it's stressful. I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think globally, we're all in the same. I don't think I've ever had a disruption or a scenario that I can honestly look across the globe and have the same conversation with, somebody in Australia or someone in Singapore or someone in, China or the Philippines or any of these places. And you're literally, I have an editor in Jordan, and he's in the same situation. It's the craziest thing. But we've all been coping for all this time. And it's time to start really thinking about what do we do intentionally to really build our resilience so that when we come through this, we're able to really do it with this grasp on reality, with improvise, the ability to improvise and really find meaning in the situation.
I love that you picked up 2 out of your 3 points, read from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning,
Yes.
So I want to follow through that a little bit and also pick up on the carrot that you dangled right in front of us, which was, your personal story. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh gosh. So which one are you thinking of?
I don't know. You tell me.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going somewhere from the book. No. So, it's interesting. About maybe 2011. So I launched the business in 2007. And then in 2011, I had been teaching all this stuff from Harvard, and I had been teaching a lot of, really well research backed leadership things. And I started to think, what's the story that only I can tell? And so I literally went to 10 people that know me best. And I asked that question. And to a person, 10 people got back to me and said, Jennifer, you're nothing if not resilient. And I had never thought about resilience. But what I realized is that I had been through these, and that's why I asked which one. I have been through this crazy amount of major life transition events that happened. And I was still, kind of coming back. And I wouldn't even say going back. It was like emerging new and different and moving forward, which is really what resilience is. And so, when people said that to me, I asked myself, well, okay, first of all, why is it that I was able to come through those situations when, many, many people go through trauma and lots of, tough personal situations. Many come out better than I did, but an awful lot come out worse. And an awful lot don't emerge stronger. And so I kind of said to myself, all right, well, what was that? Like, what did I do something? Or, what was it that allowed me to do that? And I narrowed it down to a very finite set of steps I had taken. And then I did all the research I could possibly do on resilience. And back in, 2010, there were probably 5 articles. And so Viktor Frankl, of course, was a great body of work to look at. And there's a woman, Diane Cotu at Harvard. She's an editor at Harvard Business Review, and she had written probably the single best work on resilience, and that's where we get the characteristics of resilience. But what I found, and this was so encouraging when I read, even her early research said that these characteristics are the same for leaders and organizations, and we can teach it. So what that meant was that resilience can be learned. So I looked back and I said, okay, what are these things that I did? And they became our resilience framework, which we then started teaching. So I started speaking about it. I pitched the talk at a conference that I really didn't have any idea where it was going to go. I didn't have the talk written. I just said, hey, this is an idea I have, see what you think. I gave the guy, I think, 5 or 6 different ideas to choose from. And he got back to me and he said, I've got to have this resilience. Can you come speak about this idea? And so I wrote the speech, and it's honestly, I have a bit of a career as a professional speaker. I have never given a talk where not only did I get a standing ovation, but they rushed the stage. So I couldn't get off, and the next speaker couldn't get up. She was furious with me. But these people, it was like the most profound experience. And at that moment I said, if I do nothing else for the rest of my life, I don't care if I have to live in a mud hut, but this is what I want to do. I've got to get this word out because people care and it's super important. So I really started, thinking about how do we build resilience? And so in the book, there's a resilience framework, and it really is, resilience is a function of our mindset and the choices that we make. And underlying that is our core beliefs, whatever we really know to be true. So our mindset is a function of attitude and our authenticity, and our choices are a function of our purpose and our definition of success. And so we put all that in, a bunch of cubes in a cute little diagram, and all of a sudden it's like it's making sense to people, and we're able to teach it to leaders and to organizations. And it's not only been life-changing for me. We watched an organization about a year ago. This is when I really knew we had something after the talk. But we after the talk, I wrote, a 2.5-day workshop with my co-author. And then we wrote the book after the workshop kind of made it. But we put a leadership team through the resilience workshop. And, you go and you do these workshops and you think, okay, everybody takes the binder away and you don't really know if you've made a difference. So I called the CEO. You're laughing. So I called the CEO about 3 months later, and I said, hey, Sean, what's changed? And as I asked the question, like my heart's pounding in my chest because I don't want to hear the answer that the binder is still on the shelf, right? So he says to me, Jennifer, our entire company has more courage because 12 people went through this program. And I was floored. I was blown away. But I started calling those 12 people to find out, okay, wait, what did you take away? What really stuck? And what was absolutely amazing was the personal breakthroughs that they had when they really started thinking about, when you think about authenticity, it really is about your filters and being able to identify these filters through which we view the world. And really getting a sense of how do we break through the top of our comfort zone with our purpose? There were these big concepts that you just don't talk about in corporate training these days. You don't really, that distance between your head and your heart rarely gets traveled in a corporate training workshop. And we were in there talking about faith. We were talking about your core beliefs. These things were profound. And then on the last day, we took it and we said, okay, so how does that translate to your organization? And the head of HR was in the room, and she almost made me stop because it was so edgy. This conversation was so real. And then we brought the CEO in, and we had him have this very real conversation with his, top 12 high potentials. And it changed the company. It was just incredible. It changed individuals, and it changed. I had one of the senior leaders, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give away if somebody's listening to this, but we had one of their senior leaders called me and he said, you finally got to, and it was one of his employees. And he called me and thanked me for really getting to this guy and changing his life. And it was just, it's so heady. It's unbelievable. And it was funny because I remember calling my co-author. She does a lot of personal growth work. This was really new to me. And I said, Cindy, how do you deal with this? Because I can't bear the weight of, these reactions that are going on. It was so unbelievable. But I mean, I think that's the passion, and that's what I love to do, is create those kind of breakthroughs. And I have to say, I mean, this is bigger. This is so much bigger than me. The content is it's so real. And I think the pandemic has only, when we started this, no one was talking about resilience. And now it's like everybody wants to know, how do we become more resilient? And I think in many cases, the sad part is what they're asking is, how do we cope? But what we really need to do is think very intentionally about how do we build those components of what we call the resilience framework. And it's work. I mean, this is edgy, it's in your face, it's, hair flying in the wind kind of work. I mean, this is like,
It's great visual.
it is. I mean, it is. That's how you feel when you're on the edge, right? I mean, this is, unless you get there as a leader and you really know who you are as a person, you're never going to get how you are as a leader, because who you are as a person really shapes who you are as a leader. And that's what we want to get to. And you know that. I mean, all your work speaks to that.
It does. And certainly being in the crucible is some of the things I've written about and been through myself, from cancer to failed IVF to business struggles to, you name it. So I understand what that kind of experience can cause us to press pause and do some reflection. And I'm desperate to know, when you're standing on that stage and getting rushed, what was one of the stories you told about your personal experience that had people clamor to get more of you?
Well, one of the biggest stories that I have is I was a competitive water skier for many years. I was top 50 in the US, and I was very, very serious about it. I was a judge and a driver, and I was at the highest levels of a sport that I dearly loved. I mean, it was my life for 10 years. I was a senior leader in several corporations and had negotiated like flexible work arrangement to be able to train. And it really, truly defined who I was. And when I moved to Memphis, Tennessee. And shortly after I moved there, I had my first car accident, which knocked me out of competition. And then I was rehabbing that one. And a year later, I had the second car accident, which knocked me out of training. And then a year after that, I was rehabbing and finally got on the water for the first time, only to find out that I had a blood disorder, that I would never be able to do cardio again.
What? Never be able to do cardio, like exercise?
Yeah, I can't get my heart rate up.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, for someone who is a competitive athlete, that was an absolutely life-altering experience that I had to come to grips with. And, obviously it's not corporate, it's not business, obviously it's a health kind of thing. And I've had a fair share of those too. And this was the first one, right? So, when you think about something that really defines who you are and what you love, I mean, there's no place on earth I'd rather be than behind that boat. And I couldn't, the last time I skied, they picked me up out of the water because I couldn't even get out. Nobody knew why. I mean, it was like this crazy, like, what's wrong with Jennifer kind of thing. And, and I'm trying to act normal and it just didn't work. And so, lo and behold, we learned. So that was one of the things where I had to find, and, I had a water ski coach that was just brilliant. And one of the things he said is, if you're going to make a change, you can't stop doing something unless you replace it with something else. So if you have a habit, and in his mind, it was a habit, right? So if you're holding the rope the wrong way or you're leaning the wrong way, he wouldn't say, stop doing that. He would say, do this instead. So you would have to give up something in order to get to the next, right? So for me, it was like, all this time, and you think about like driving to the lake, skiing, getting the boat in the water, cleaning the boat, getting back, judging, driving, all this. It was an ungodly amount of time. So I got involved in bluegrass music, which is the strangest possible thing you could think of. But I literally ended up fronting a bluegrass band just to fill the time that, I had spent skiing. And I found this other aspect of my life that was just really fun. And so I figured out, like, life goes on and we can make the best of this. And then in the middle of it, or shortly after that, started Leadership. I'm sure from your cancer and whatnot. I mean, you go through something like that and it causes you to pause and, really think about, what do you want? What's going to make you happy? And, that was something where I said, at that point, I didn't really want to, and I had had a number of experiences leading up to this, but intentionally, I knew at some point I was going to start a business and I was going to start doing some things on my own. But at that point, it was like, okay, I'm ready. Like no time like the present, So yeah, that was one of the life-changing stories that I usually tell anyway. That certainly, I think was started maybe me on the path of, what did I do to be resilient?
Yeah. When you have your dreams ripped out from under you, it is pretty course altering. The question I had about the resilience framework and comparing resilience to coping, do you think we have to go through a coping stage before we can start then thinking forward?
I think it depends on the challenge. Or the disruption, I should say. It's funny, before the pandemic, I would have unequivocally said no. In fact, when we wrote the book, the subtitle is How Leaders and Organizations Can Build Resilience Before Disruption Hits. And so I would have stood here and told you, pounding my fist, that you need to build resilience before the disruption hits. Resilience is the thing that you do before you have to cope so that the coping is easier, you get through things faster, whatnot. And now we find ourselves in this situation where I've had to kind of swallow hard and go, well, I guess we can do this in the heat of the battle too. And we've had to find ways. So I think what's been challenging is getting people out of the coping, to distance yourself from the coping, maybe step off the field and out onto the balcony, and really be able to kind of step back and say, all right, let me look at my life from, 50,000 feet up and figure out the resilience part, because I really don't think you can build resilience while you're in the heat of survival mode. I think it is really, really hard. It's something you've got to do kind of separate from that. Now, what I'm learning that unbeknownst to me, I think you can do both, but I think you have to be intentional about putting aside the coping and creating space to really get intentional about how to get stronger and how to kind of answer those questions in the framework about how to really get more authentic and what is your purpose in a situation? What is your definition of success? I mean, can you do that while you're coping? Yeah, but I don't think you can do it when you're just when you're mired in coping.
Yeah, your biology won't allow it.
You're totally in flight mode. So it's really hard at that point. But so no, I don't think to answer your question, I don't think you have to go through the coping necessarily. I mean, I've had a lot of people that we've taught this too that didn't have any real reason to cope right now. They're just building resilience kind of for the future. But certainly with the pandemic, I think we've all done our fair share of coping.
Yeah. Had the rug pulled out again in many instances. Some more forcefully than others, that's for sure. And for longer than others.
I think the length of this has been just the hardest thing to deal with.
Yeah. I have a friend of mine. She's a massage therapist, runs her own practice from home. She was saying in one day, over the course of 2 days, the lockdown happened and she had to cancel her 50th birthday party. So no social things. She did that. And then also her work shut down for, they were saying at the time, probably 6 months, her only source of income. And then she couldn't go to a competitive triathlon that she was going to. So her health, her social, and her work gone in 2 days. So yeah, you're going to be big coping before you decide what's the meaning in this.
And there's nothing wrong with that. When I talk to somebody like that, sometimes it's when you're in the thick of it, sometimes it's okay not to build resilience in that moment. Like just get through it. Get in survival mode, buckle down, get yourself over the hump, and then we'll think about, building resilience. I think at that point, it's sort of where Maslow's hierarchy of needs come in, right? Like you have to really focus on survival first. It's interesting. I don't think I've ever given that advice as often as I have this year, but in many cases, that's where we are.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask you a little bit more about success, because I'm fascinated that this has come out through one of your principles or part of your framework. Tell me a little bit more about how you take people through contemplating success as part of a resilience piece.
Yeah, and that's a great question. It's a little complicated. There are a series of exercises that we ask people to do, and they're in the book if anybody is interested. But there are a series of exercises that we ask people to do. And the first is really, one of them is to really understand your filters. So there's a, kind of the book is sort of, I don't want to say linear, but it builds on itself, right? So we talk about authenticity. We'll talk about mindset, comfort zone. There's some things that kind of, once you get through that, knowing your filters and understanding some of that, then we like to look at things like times in your life where you were most alive. So there's a series of questions that's one of the questions, right? So think about, and it doesn't have to be positive or negative, but just think about, jot down and we ask people to do this quickly. So jot down quickly times in your life that you felt most alive. Then we might ask times in your life when you were afraid of getting in trouble. And then we might ask people that you admire. And we'll stand there and do think about celebrities, think about people from history, think about authors, think about musicians, anything that you admire. So we end up with this, several pages, if you will, of data on what matters to people. And then we'll ask them to go through and circle themes and really look at what was driving you in those moments where you came alive, or what is it about those people that you admired? And there's about 10 of these questions that we'll put people through. We'll ask people to kind of fill out, jot down quickly so you get their first instinctive response. And then we translate that to sort of driving needs. So what are the things, and my co-author has the best phrase. She talks about your definition of success has to be something that you could do on a desert island by yourself. So it's not about money. It's not about a metric. It's about who are you being when you're at your most successful. So it can't be dependent on other people. And so we help people really understand what are their driving needs and who are they at their core, like their essential part of their being. Who is that? What is that when they're being their absolute best? So for me, and of course, you can get poetic about this. The more thought you put into it, you can kind of come up with a statement that you memorize. But, mine is really four things. And one is having the strength to be true to myself. So when I'm being successful, I'm really being true to who I am at my core. I'm impacting life instead of being happened to. I'm connecting with others while standing on my own. And I'm really relishing that significance of having made a difference. So it's interesting, I memorized a statement. It was basically that, but in a little more poetic. But I memorized that years ago, back in maybe 97-ish. And, you memorize it, and it is as much a part of me as anything on my body, but I don't talk about it very often. I'm not sure it even comes out very often. But I had a situation, and we talk about, this is how resilience works. When you build things like these elements, I had a situation several years ago where my car caught fire.
What's with you and cars?
I don't know. Yeah, so everybody asks me that in the workshops too. It's funny, none of them were actually things that I caused, which I think is rather humorous. But anyway, car catches fire, leave the dealership. They had spilled transmission fluid over the exhaust manifold. So 5 minutes out of the dealership, I've got flames coming out of the passenger compartment. And I'm trying to, keep myself safe, and I'm in traffic. So I'm trying to not, have a problem. So, and my foot is in a boot because I had foot surgery. So I literally pull off, and I literally do this dive out of the car, and my computer goes first, and then I go out of the car. And, I'm in this situation where I'm watching, and the best part was I had just packed the car. I was leaving for a month, and the car was packed. So I literally lost everything that mattered for the next month was in that car. And so I'm watching the car burn, and I'm having this rather traumatic experience, as you might imagine. And so the long story short, the guy from the dealership that did the damage finally shows up, and he agrees to drive me back to that dealership. Now, why? I don't know. What are we going to do? But anyway, I go back. As that event unfolded, I had every opportunity to go sue them, own a car dealership. I could have gone bananas trying to get back at the car dealer, trying to prove they made a mistake, all these things I could have done. And in the end, in that moment, I walked into the dealership that set fire to my car, and I said, in a calm voice, I said, okay, here's where we are. I mean, this is what happened. What are we going to do now? And the guy looks at me and he goes, you don't even sound mad. And I'm like, believe me, I'm furious, but it's not going to do any of us any good if I come in here and yell and scream. So let's talk about how we're going to settle this. And I literally, in the next month that followed, what mattered to me was getting back as quickly as possible. I went and bought everything that was missing. We settled the case. I got an okay deal. I didn't get a great deal. I don't own a car dealership. I didn't sue. The trauma wasn't worth it. And so I made this series of decisions. And then what happened was I got caught up in the actual trauma. I got to the point where I couldn't physically put things in the car. And that was when I knew I needed help. Because, I mean, I literally couldn't put a briefcase in my car out of this paralyzing fear that something was going to happen. So I went and saw a trauma specialist. And through the processing of the trauma, she said to me, she got me through, well, what caused you to make the decisions that you did? And I went back, and it was my definition of success every step of the way. And it was never conscious to me, but I was totally true to my values. I didn't fight and succumb to all the attorneys that wanted to sue, that wanted to make a big fuss about this. I never felt like a victim. I was like, okay, I'm in control. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go buy the things I'm missing. I'm going to rent a car. I'm going to continue on my, to my client meeting. I'm going to continue on the trip I was going on. I really lived every bit of that definition of success because I had figured it out before I needed it. And when I figured that out, the trauma went away.
Oh, wow.
It was unbelievable. I mean, it was like this life-changing moment where as soon as I realized there was a reason that drove every decision I made. And it was that my definition of success was so unconscious to me. It was so ingrained in me that I made decisions that were in accordance with my values, even in the midst of the worst possible coping. And that's the power of really building resilience and building that definition before you need it.
I love that. I love how your definition of success are guardrails for everything that you undertake or experience. So with regards to this concept of success, so if that definition is about beingness and values and acting on your values in the moment, what then is the use of goals? Because that's usually what people link success and goals to.
Yeah, so I think that's interesting. So I'm going to give you an off-the-cuff answer because I've never been asked that. Gosh, I think of success as who you're being. Goals are what you're doing. So I think you should be able to live your definition of success even when you're not meeting your goals. Now I may rethink that by tomorrow, but that's where, that's really where I think goals are doing, success is being.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you say to people who have, I'm asking you these questions because I wrestle with these all the time with my own clients. What about those of us who hang their success in their doing piece instead of their being piece?
That's the same problem as someone that is, I think of the difference between excellence and perfection. If success is all about what you're doing, you're never done. You never get to sit there and relish it and really be it, because there's always another one. There's always another goal. There's always something else to do. Where I think success is about who you are. And that's not to say that goals are bad or that there's no purpose for goals. I mean, goals are necessary and goals are important. But I don't know that goals and success are the same. So I would say it's probably problematic. I mean, I think those people are going to struggle with really feeling successful as a person. It's kind of like saying success is about money or success is about a metric of some kind. What happens when it isn't? What happens when that goes away?
Yeah, like your car explodes and you got nothing.
I mean, success is about who you are. And I think so here's what I think happens is I think people that are using goals as a way to measure success are missing the true work of knowing who they are inside and how who they're being shapes who they are as a leader.
I agree with that. And they're also setting themselves up for failure, because when life does pull the rug, and it often does, the sense of success that they were seeking disappears. Often it's external. Yeah. So I have many questions still. When we're talking about organizational design, and organizations are complex systems, and resilience is about the ability to experience disruption and grow stronger from it. Your core premise is that we need to build resilience before disruption if we can, if not as it's occurring. How do we go about building resilience in an organization? I mean, you talked about the framework from a personal point of view. Then do we apply the exact same questions in an organizational context?
Absolutely. So there's one addition. So the entire framework can be applied in an organizational context. I will say the language is a bit different, right? We might talk about core beliefs. That might be your faith as an individual, or your values, or in an organization, that might be your mission or your value. It could be values too, but it could be your mission or your vision, or whatever that organizational statement is that captures the sort of, essential whatness of the organization. So the language is a bit different, and maybe purpose is a goal or a metric or an objective. Your definition of success may be a mission statement, or it may be something other than, and frankly, in an organization, it may have more to do with, the financial, there's some realities about organizations, right? But the exact framework applies to organizations with one addition. And the addition is, the only way this works in organizations is if we create alignment. You can't just go into an organization and have the CEO say, all right, here are all the values, here's the mission, here's the definition of success, here's what it means to be authentic. We have to create alignment around that with the people who matter. So when we think about building resilient organizations, we're bringing the leadership team together, maybe even a board, as a start, to get some engagement from them. And then we bring a leadership team together and we engage different levels in the organization. It's a very inclusive process. And what it does is it creates a shared agenda around those elements of the framework. So, and when we did that, the company I mentioned earlier that did a really great job with that, I mean, they wrestled with it, but what they had to come to grips with was they were actually a merger of 7 companies. So they had people, 7. So they had different legacies where, there was an Australian subsidiary of that company. There were people in the US, and in the US, you had California, you had Florida, you had Texas, you had, those are vastly different cultures. It was a global company. And so we brought all these people together. And so, but if they really want to be a resilient company, those people have to align around, what does it really mean to be successful here? And that was the interesting thing, because the CEO certainly had that when they merged, the CEO, of course, had told the street, well, there's a reason we're merging and we're going to get this value and the synergy from all these different places. And, we have products that are complementary. And he told this great story. But what he missed was that, first of all, it was a public company, but a community-driven mission. So each of the companies that they had acquired had a very altruistic, community-driven mission. So when those people came together, the one thing they had in common was that we're not in it for the money. We're not in it for the profit. We're not in it for the value add. We're in it to make a difference in the community. But that message was nowhere at the high level. And so what was fascinating was when they figured that out and they were able to say, well, what does it really mean for us to be authentic? It means we're serving our community. It means we're making a difference. We're making things easier in schools and churches and community centers and these customers that they served. And when they aligned around that, and then they brought the CEO in and he could see the passion around, what does that kind of success mean? That profit language, that went right out the window. But what they had was alignment around a cause. And the passion and the emotion and he would tell you the courage that came out of that. And when I say courage, once an organization builds this shared agenda, it allows them to make decisions where they can very clearly say what's in and what's out. And everybody's aligned to be able to make those decisions. It's not like you got to go and wrestle for resources and have this big debate and struggle and, internal competition. When you have that kind of alignment, and disruption hits, everybody's on the same page. It's like an insurance policy so that when disruption hits, everybody just jumps into action because they know what the values are. They know what it means to be authentic. They know what success looks like. They know what their purpose is. And most importantly, they know what their core beliefs, they know what they stand for as an organization. And that's what makes a resilient organization. So it's the same framework plus alignment.
Love it. And in that, what is the role of the CEO?
Oh, they've got to lead it. I mean, they don't have to go create it, but they've got to be willing. So here's the role. The role, and this is a tough one. The role is they have to be adaptive. And when I say adaptive, it's a big word with a lot packed in there. So adaptive is open-minded, vulnerable. They have to be willing to open it up to a shared conversation. They could certainly be a visionary and they can, espouse their vision and all of that. But a CEO in this context has to go in this thing with a bit of a fearless attitude around what are they going to come back with. That CEO, now this guy's absolutely amazing. I mean, he called me in to do this with a very open mind, knowing that they might come up with something that was not at all what he wanted to do. So he was very willing and played along and said all the right things and, just did a great job. There are a lot of CEOs that won't do that. But this is my coaching to them would be, you've got to be willing to let go and see where your people take this. This was a finance company, a bit of a fintech company. They weren't going to go become an amusement park. I mean, they know what their mission is, right? The CEO doesn't have to be afraid that at the end of the day, they're not going to be a payments company anymore. You can provide some guardrails and some guidelines and you can give your vision or whatever you want the organization to be, and then let them run with it. But you got to be open to what they're going to come back with.
I'd love to see that, to see a fintech company become an amusement park. That's awesome.
Well, that's what, I had this conversation with him ahead of time and I said, you're taking a risk. Like, I want to just acknowledge that there's a risk in saying, okay, you guys go create a shared agenda, because they might come back with something that isn't what you want. And it was really ironic. I was working with two payments companies at the same time. This one, great, go for it. Bring me in at the end. I want to see what they come up with, and they really did a phenomenal job. He was open-minded. He listened to them. They listened to him. They had a great conversation. Everything worked really well. The other guy at the other payments company was like, oh, I'm not letting my people decide what this is. That's me. It's my role, right? I'm going to tell them what we are. Well, guess who's more successful today?
Yeah, absolutely.
And guess who still has almost that same team versus 100% turnover. So, it's absolutely astounding what happened when people come together and rally around a cause.
That's beautiful.
It's the Simon Sinek, when you think about the Simon Sinek, start with why, there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah. And be guided by who, and that comes to your core piece there around success. Jennifer, this has been really fun. Thank you so much for sharing your insight, your stories, your wisdom. And I can't wait to get stuck into your book and to pour over the frameworks. It sounds awesome.
And I am excited to read yours and look at yours as well. I learned so much prepping for this that I'm excited to be here and I'm really excited to get to know you. And thank you so much. I enjoyed it too.
No worries. I'll send you a copy of People Stuff. That's my latest one. I think you'll probably find that the most relevant.
I would love to. Absolutely.
All right.
We'll swap. I'll happily get you one of mine as well if you don't have it yet.
Perfect. Sounds good.
We'll do that.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That was so much fun. She is just hilarious and a pleasure. You can just feel Jennifer's passion seeping through the airwaves, can't you? I just loved it. I guess for me, I love the definition of success. It's who you're being and what you're doing when you're alone on a desert island. My immediate thought was like, I'm just reading a book under a tree. But yeah, that's me being facetious. I think that is beautiful. So success is really who you're being. And it's one of the core fundamentals I discuss with clients every time I start work with them. How do you define success? And it's fundamental to how we build our world around us, whether it's our personal world or our leadership world, and how those two link together. It's pretty powerful stuff, her resilience framework, and the core fundamentals of beliefs and mindset and actions that you take based on those around your purpose and your definition of success are certainly some of the key elements I explore with all my leaders, particularly in my Amplifiers group. And Amplifiers is for high-level leaders and CEOs, managing directors who want to be in the company of like-minded people so that you can explore each other's definition of success, each other's purpose, and explore how you can make a bigger impact in whatever sphere of the world and industry that you're working in. So if that sounds like fun for you, because it is fun, do check us out. It's at zoerouth.com/amplifiers-program. We'll put a link in the show notes for you so you can just hop on that and take a look. Would love to have you on board if you think a community like that would really support you in your leadership journey. And I'd love to meet you. In the meantime, hope you enjoyed this podcast. Feel free to leave us a review and a rating. That would be completely awesome and really good for the Karma Fairies. And in the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.